If you live in the West, you see the current fight between China and Japan, the trade bans, the diplomatic snubs, and you likely believe China is simply flexing its new muscle. But the true, structural reason why China is so mad at Japan today is a story about unresolved history and the incredible paradox of World War II. My name is Dr. Rufus Brown, and I understand this paradox not just from reading history books, but from living the region's complexity. Although I lecture on geopolitics from Berkeley, California, I have lived and studied extensively in the Far East, including time spent immersed in China and regular visits to Japan. I speak some Mandarin and have traveled across China, seeing the weight of this history with my own eyes. I can tell you with certainty that this intimate knowledge of the region's deep, painful history and current geopolitical dynamics is precisely what helps me understand the absolute finality of China's outstanding grievance. Consider this contrast. Japan struck the decisive first blow against the United States at Pearl Harbor. The result? Today the US is Japan's ultimate protector. Japan is not an independent military power. It hosts approximately 55,000 American troops across dozens of bases, a forward projection of US power that makes Japan, in military terms, almost a vassal state. The bombing of Pearl Harbor secured a protector for Japan. Now, consider China. China suffered far greater losses than the US in the war, upwards of 20 million dead. But for decades, China was too weak and too focused on its own internal development to exact a geopolitical price. China was forced to watch Japan thrive under the US security umbrella, while simultaneously denying its wartime past. I argue that this is the core of the current crisis. China is no longer weak. It is a powerful, assertive nation on the ascendant, and it is no longer accepting Japan's carefully cultivated memory loss. This is the debt of history that Beijing is finally ready to collect. To understand the depth of this debt, we must briefly, but explicitly, look at the trauma Japan inflicted across the Far East, trauma that Japan is determined to minimize. In the West, World War II memory is defined by the Holocaust. In the Far East, the memory is defined by the sheer scale of the Imperial Japanese Army's brutality. This was not a war of clean conflict. It was a campaign designed to break the will of entire populations. The most infamous example is the Nanjing Massacre in 1937, where Japanese troops began a 6-week campaign of mass executions, widespread looting, and systematic rape, killing an estimated 200,000 to 300,000 civilians and soldiers. For China, it remains the ultimate symbol of dehumanization. Beyond Nanjing, the horrors extended to industrialized human experimentation. Unit 731 conducted vivisections and disease-infesting experiments on thousands of live prisoners, Chinese, Korean, Russian, and allied POWs. The scientists responsible for these crimes were later granted immunity by the United States in exchange for their biological weapons data, a deal that remains a major source of tension in Sino-American relations to this day. Finally, there is the enduring shame of the comfort women, hundreds of thousands of women and girls from Korea, China, and the Philippines who were forcibly conscripted into sexual slavery. The key is that China's anger is not unique. This trauma is shared by South Korea, the Philippines, and Southeast Asian nations. But nations like South Korea and the Philippines in the post-war era were heavily dependent on trade and the US security umbrella. They often had to leverage their historical anger, accepting conditional aid or vague apologies to maintain ties with powerful Japan. China does not have that constraint. As China has become an economic and military superpower, I believe its motivation has shifted from simple resentment to a strategic, principled demand for recognition. The stronger China gets, the louder the historical demands become. They see themselves as the historical avenger for the entire Far East and their own pride. If Japan's policy had been simple silence, the anger might have faded. But Japan's conservative political establishment has consistently engaged in specific, deliberate actions that prove to Beijing that the war-era mindset is not dead, it is simply dormant. I call this the denial machine. This machine operates on two primary fronts: historical revisionism and symbolic glorification. The first component is the ongoing controversy over Japanese school history textbooks. There is a persistent effort by nationalist groups, often supported by ruling party politicians, to publish books that significantly downplay, excuse, or outright delete critical facts about war crimes. They often frame Japan's invasion as a noble effort to liberate Asia from Western colonialism, omitting the cruelty and terror that came with it. The result is that new generations of Japanese citizens are often left with a sanitized, ambiguous history, making them fundamentally unable to grasp the source of China's fury. This failure to acknowledge the truth nurtures denial and keeps the wound open. The second, and most visible component, is the Yasukuni Shrine. This shrine honors nearly 2.5 million of Japan's war dead, including 14 class A war criminals enshrined in 1978. When Japanese prime ministers, cabinet ministers, or high-profile politicians visit Yasukuni, they are, in Beijing's eyes, doing the equivalent of a German chancellor laying a wreath at a monument glorifying Hitler. These visits, often timed around the August 15 surrender anniversary, are seen not as mourning the dead, but as legitimizing the aggression of the men who launched the war. This dual strategy of minimizing the past in classrooms while honoring the architects of that past means that China views every Japanese political move, even purely defensive ones, through the lens of pre-1945 imperial ambition. This brings us to the present day and the specific issue that triggered the current crisis: the potential for Japanese military intervention over Taiwan. This is where China's historical anger and its modern geopolitical priorities violently collide. For China, Taiwan is the core of core interests, an internal province destined for reunification. They demand that all foreign powers respect their sovereignty claim and stay out of what they see as a domestic affair. But when Japan's Prime Minister, Takaichi, recently suggested that a Taiwan contingency would qualify as a survival-threatening situation, potentially allowing the use of collective self-defense, meaning the Japanese military could intervene, it triggered an overwhelming, furious reaction from Beijing. Why such rage? Because in China's eyes, the unrepentant nature of Japan's past has been weaponized into a dangerous future. China sees Japan's move as the ultimate unforgivable insult. Japan, which has never offered a genuine apology for its atrocities, now has the audacity to consider mounting military action against Chinese sovereignty once again. It confirms their deepest historical fear that the Japanese military machine, which once swept across the entire Far East, is being reawakened and pointed at them. The idea of the self-defense forces operating near Taiwan is not seen as defensive. It is seen as the re-emergence of the Imperial Army's pre-war aggression, and China is willing to deploy massive economic coercion to stop it. The tension between China and Japan is not a simple trade spat. It is the weight of unresolved history crashing into the strategic realities of the 21st century. For the American audience, the failure to understand this historical context is a massive blind spot. We see the conflict as purely political. China sees it as a moral and historical imperative. The debt is past due and Beijing is ready to collect. I argue that until there is genuine, unambiguous atonement, this anger will remain a permanent, destabilizing factor in one of the world's most critical regions. If this deep dive helped you understand the historical engine driving China's fury, I would immensely appreciate it if you would give this video a like and subscribe to Last Thing Before Sleeping for more such videos. You can find this analysis, along with all my other geopolitical breakdowns, in the home for this series, the Global Politics Explained playlist in the Last Thing Before Sleeping channel. This is Rufus Brown signing off. Thank you for watching.